If you've been thinking, why am I so reactive lately? I want you to hear this. You're not too much. You're not too emotional. You are likely in a cortisol cascade. Today, we're unpacking the stress pattern that drives mood swings, irritability, and hormonal volatility, and why this is about load, not personality. Hi, I'm Janell Yule, functional health practitioner. Let's translate stress physiology into something that actually makes sense to you. So if you've been thinking lately, I don't feel like myself. Maybe your energy has been up and down, you're easily overwhelmed, you feel like your resiliency to handle stress and life just isn't what it used to be. You're getting irritated at what were once really little things. Maybe you even feel anger to the point of rage. There is no shame or judgment here. I think that women need to be able to have these conversations around what they are experiencing and what they're feeling. Because unfortunately, somewhere along the way, we started to normalize chronic stress, always being connected, busy, people having access to us, being on the go, and putting our nervous systems into a perpetual state of fight or flight. So I want to take a moment here to pause and really explain to you the different parts of your nervous system, because I think that is really important. So we have what is called our sympathetic nervous system, and that's what I was referring to, your fight or your flight. And that is that part of your nervous system where you're in activation. Maybe you are feeling overwhelmed or anxious or frustrated or angry or a variety of different emotions and feelings. And then we have your parasympathetic nervous system, and that is the part of your nervous system that is responsible for rest, digestion, healing. That part of your nervous system is where you feel peace and calm, like you're in the flow. You feel like you can, think clearly. You can experience an emotion, but it doesn't, like, you can handle it. And that is also what's called your ventral vagal part of your nervous system, with the polyvagal theory. So then there's another piece of that, which is called your dorsal vagal. And that is the part of your nervous system that you move into shutdown, you move into freeze, you move into procrastination, you move into a shame spiral. And so I think it's really important to start to name these parts of our nervous system, because part of understanding this is to actually be able to understand what part are you operating from in any given moment on any given day. And I want to be really clear here, because I think when we start to learn these things, then we can label moving into sympathetic or activation as something that's bad or wrong, or moving into that freeze state or that shutdown state as, again, something that is bad or wrong and that needs to be avoided, and that we are somehow being successful or winning if we are spending all of our time in parasympathetic and ventral vagal. And the reality is, we need all parts of our nervous system. We're meant to move through the different parts and that nervous system ladder throughout our days. The challenge or the problem that has started is this state of chronic stress. And so we shoot ourselves out of a cannon in the morning. We go sympathetic dominant. And I'm going to talk about that here as we go through today's episode, and we never actually come down to any of the other parts of our nervous system. We never actually feel that ventral vagal. We never actually feel that regulated state, or we toggle between activation and shutdown, and we have nothing in between. And I refer to this as like the on-off switch. It's like there's no dimmer happening. It's either I'm either on or I'm off. Like I'm up or I'm down, and there's nothing in between. And so if you are experiencing that cortisol cascade, it is likely that you are in that sympathetic dominance either the vast majority of your day or all day. And you are that. It's either I'm either on or I'm off. And in order to get yourself going, you may need something like caffeine. And in order to calm yourself down at night, you may find yourself, using alcohol or using various supplements or needing something to support your sleep. And so the first place that I want to go with this is, again, understanding a little bit more of our physiology, and that is something called your HPA axis. And what is your HPA axis? So HPA stands for hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. You also have a hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. You also have a hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis or gonad axis. And so why this is important to name this is because everything starts in the brain at the hypothalamus level. And that's really important because when it comes to cortisol, and cortisol being that stress hormone that is secreted by our adrenal glands, along with things like norepinephrine and adrenaline, is that when, someone is does a hormone test and comes back with high cortisol, or when someone maybe is labeled something as adrenal fatigue, that was kind of a buzzword. Actually, it's probably been about a decade ago. I mean, you still hear it here and there. And the adrenals were the ones that were getting blamed. It's like the adrenals are secreting too much cortisol, or the adrenals are fatigued and not secreting enough cortisol. And really what's happening is this is a top-down function in your body, and it is all starting in the brain. So I want to talk to you about external stressors and internal stressors, because I think that there's a huge misconception when we talk about stress, that stress is only external, and it is financial stress or relationship stress or the stress of the world or professional or job stress. And yes, those things are all external stressors, and there are also internal stressors. And so over fasting, undernourishing your body, under resourcing your body from a standpoint of macronutrients, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, but also micronutrients in the forms of vitamins and minerals is a stressor to your body. Having sluggish detoxification or drainage pathways is a stressor to your body. So if you are not hydrated enough and eliminating through urine, or if you are not having regular bowel movements every single day, or if your liver is experiencing stress, those are stressors on your body. Having overgrowth of bacteria or gut pathogens is a stressor on your body. So there are internal stressors as well. And one of the things that the whole episode last week was all around blood sugar, and that is also a big internal stressor. So if you are fasting in the morning and cortisol is spiking because you don't have an appetite, or you're drinking coffee first thing without anchoring it in with a real meal, that is an internal stressor on your body. And with stressors as well. And so internal stressors, like those are real things that can be happening in someone's body. The inflammation, the gut pathogens, the blood sugar instability, the sluggish drainage. And when it comes to what we perceive as external stressors, there are the real stressors and then those imagined stressors. And so what I mean by that is that's where there is facts about certain things that are happening in your life. So you may be dealing with an aging parent who is experiencing some health challenges. That is a fact. That is something that is happening in your life. And you could also be creating perceived stressors around that, as far as what that means moving forward, or what could happen, or if this happens then it means this, and all of these different stories that we make up in our brains that have never happened and may likely never happen. And so this is also really important as to understanding that all of this stuff is starting in the brain. And so if you are chronically moving into a state of anxiety, and anxiety is that, and I'm not talking about I'm talking about kind of the anxiety that we can experience on a day-to-day basis, not things that are clinical long-term mental health diagnosis. So I want to be really clear about that because there is a difference. And so, we move into the future and it's like, well, if this doesn't happen, then this may happen. And then I have a story about this. And a lot of these stories come from our brain wanting predictability and familiarity. And so it goes back into the files and says, how have we experienced this in the past, or how may we experience this? And it creates a story around that. And so this is part of the mindset and nervous system work that I do, is shifting that on a brain level and a body level, because this is often driving this HPA axis or this cortisol cascade. So the next thing that I think is really important to talk about and address is that high cortisol versus low cortisol. And the reality is it's two sides to the same coin. The symptoms often look very, very similar. So symptoms could be sleep disruption, either trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, cravings, sweet, salty, crunchy, the blood sugar instability, fatigue, so crashing in the afternoon, but yet feeling tired and wired at night, maybe having a hard time, like feeling like it's moving through mud in the morning to try to get yourself going, and you really can't get yourself going without caffeine or some kind of stimulant. Mood issues, and so it could look more like depression, anxiety, or apathy. And so really low cortisol simply means that you were stuck and were in that sympathetic dominance, and high cortisol was driving the ship, or driving that pattern for a really long time, and your body can no longer keep up with the demands of the stress, and now your cortisol is low. So what that is called is, it's actually called allostatic load. So basically when the stress, so either internal, external, perceived, or actual, exceeds what the body can handle. And so that allostatic load becomes too big, and then your body actually starts to down regulate producing cortisol. So what this could have looked like for you is, you could think back to a time in your life where you felt like Wonder Woman. You felt like Superwoman. You were like, I can do all things. I can get up in the morning and I can get my workout in, and I can get everybody off to school, and I can get myself together, and I can live a full day, and I can handle everything that is being thrown at me. And that you can do that for a period of time. And if that is chronic, or if you are not resourcing yourself in a way where you're able to handle that, you start to kind of like, you're coming up a bell curve and you start to kind of come over the curve, and then you start to maybe notice that, oh, I'm crashing in the afternoon, so just have a little bit of caffeine, or I have some hit of sugar, and then I'm okay. Or you find that at the end of the week, you're like, I'm having a really hard time winding down, so maybe you're starting to use some alcohol or something to help calm you. And then all of a sudden you come over that bell curve and you come down, and it's like you just feel like you crashed. And you're like, again, I am not able to handle, I'm not resilient to the stress anymore. And so that is kind of a visual of what the cortisol cascade can look like, from a like what happens over time. And then there's this cortisol cascade that could be happening all day long. So like I said, it's like maybe you are having a hard time getting up in the morning, and it's like you're having to, do something to get yourself going. And then it's like you're okay for a while, and then you crash midday, maybe like 3 to 5, and then you get a second wind at night, or you just never get that second wind. So the next thing that I want to talk about is something called the pregnenolone steal, which therefore turns into the progesterone steal. So I don't want to get too sciencey here, because really what I want to talk about is what your body is doing and why it makes sense that your body's doing it, and then what you are experiencing as a result. Okay. So pregnenolone is a hormone. Think of it like raw materials to make other hormones. And so that could your sex hormones. Estradiol is the most prominent form of estrogen in the body, progesterone, and then testosterone. So if you are in this cortisol cascade and your body needs to make cortisol for in response to stress, and again, remember we talked about all different kinds of stress, it's going to steal that raw material that it would have used to make sex hormones to instead make cortisol. And so your body is prioritizing survival and moving into protection rather than things like releasing weight or optimal metabolism and energy or your sex drive or libido. And so over time, if there's chronic stress that's happening, again, could be internal or external, that pathway actually becomes the preferred pathway in the body rather than your body taking the raw materials to make sex hormones then. And then therefore, you are not making enough progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. And then you start to experience things like mood issues because progesterone is our calming hormone. And progesterone is already being affected in midlife because progesterone is the first hormone that typically for most women is declining when they're hitting perimenopause. So if that hormone is already declining and then your body is taking raw materials to make that hormone, you're going to feel like your mood is shifting pretty rapidly. Or you're not making enough testosterone, and so your libido suffers. Your drive and like your get up and go suffers. Maybe your ability to gain muscle, even though you're strength training and you're eating enough protein, suffers. And so you can see how this isn't just I have high cortisol or I have low cortisol. This is actually impacting other things in your body and your body's ability to make these hormones. And so this goes back to a conversation that I had several episodes ago around hormone replacement therapy and how simply just putting hormones into a system where this hormone steal has been happening is only potentially going to put gasoline on the fire. It's not actually changing that root pattern that's been going on. And then we have the stress blood sugar loop. So I'm not going to spend a too terrible amount of time here because if you haven't listened to last week's episode, the entire episode is around blood sugar. And I talk about how cortisol and insulin and glucose are all connected and things like that. So I really want you to go back and listen to that episode. And what I do want to expand on here is that when we are in this cortisol cascade, like I said earlier, we have a lot more cravings. And it's like these cravings are like for specific things. So this is where it's physiological, but it's also a little bit psychological. It's like you want the salt, you want the crunch, you want the sweet. And to be honest with you, part of the reason why you want the salt, and usually what comes with that is the crunch, because it's either salted nuts or salted chips or crackers, is because when your adrenal glands are pumping out cortisol, or when they've gotten to the point where they haven't been able to, they're no longer pumping out enough cortisol to meet the demands of the stress that you're experiencing, you need sodium. And so that mineral can actually be really depleted, or that mineral can be at a loss pattern. And so I see this on a hair tissue mineral analysis test, and I can tell, wow, this woman is burning through sodium because her adrenals are like I need more sodium. And so oftentimes, if you're having a lot of cravings for salt and crunch, we really need to look at minerals. And same for sweets, because those cravings for dark chocolate could be that you need some magnesium support. And this is where, when we're on that cortisol roller coaster, we tend to snack more. And we find ourselves reaching for food to try to regulate our emotions and to actually try to calm that response down. Because when we eat something, and typically, again, it's not chicken, rice, and broccoli, it's more those snacky foods. It's maybe even what I call healthy convenience foods. Maybe it's even a protein bar, which, yes, it's better than a lot of things, and let's be honest, some of them are glorified candy bars. And so this is where that emotional eating starts to come into play. And so I recently found myself, I had a really full day of calls and just things I needed to do that required me to be really on. And I found myself in the afternoon, after eating a very blood sugar balancing lunch that was, almost 40 grams of protein. It was probably 40 grams of protein, fiber, healthy fats, like wanting to snack. And I paused because I knew it had nothing to do with food. I was on this cortisol cascade, and I really needed to stop and pause. And I actually went and sat in the chair that's behind me, and I just put my feet on the floor, and I took several deep breaths, and I was able to work with my nervous system and realize that you're okay, you're safe, you can do this. We really need to pause and ask ourselves what we need. And what I needed was a break, and I needed some encouragement, and I needed some water, and I needed to just, like I said, I needed a break. Okay. And so this is really, really important, because a lot of this is also working with your nervous system. Because if your nervous system perceives that everything is a threat, and this is called hypervigilance, you're not going to have a lot of emotional bandwidth. And so, the example that I always give is if I'm talking to a group of men and women, and ladies always laugh at this too, is that men, you will know that your wife, partner, doesn't have enough progesterone, or is in a certain phase in her cycle where her progesterone is lower, because you chew and she gives you that look like, please do not chew, please do not breathe. Okay. And if you're everyone can relate to this, everyone has had this experience. And so it just goes to show that cortisol, progesterone, these hormones, that their downstream effect of what's happening in the body will narrow your emotional capacity to handle things. And so when you're finding that you are outside of that capacity, you're going to notice things, and that is your body's giving you the awareness that you need to take a pause and ask, what do I need? And then meet that need. So here's what I want you to take away and try this week is get outside at sunrise to get natural light in your eyes. And if you're thinking, I can't do that, that seems so simple, I don't want to go out in the cold, anything like that, I want you to just pause, because the simple things consistently over time often make the biggest difference. And if it's cold outside, I'm not asking you to go out there without a jacket on, or without a hat on, or without gloves on. And you can go out there for a minute or two. Okay. And I know everyone's morning routine is different, and I have been able to work with pretty much everybody on how they can make this work, because this is how you turn on the daytime programs for your hormones and get a healthy cortisol response, rather than sending yourself sympathetic dominant first thing in the morning. And then we want to anchor that in. And I talked about this last week. We want to anchor that in with a good 30 grams of protein within 30 to 60 minutes of waking. And so if you don't have an appetite in the morning, it is a pretty clear sign that you are on the cortisol cascade. And then really, like I talked about with my story the other day, of taking micro pauses throughout the day to check in with your body and to get off of the cortisol roller coaster. So it could be a quick walk. This is much easier when the weather is warmer. It could be snuggling your pets for a few minutes. And sometimes, honestly, like the other day I sat in the chair, but honestly, sometimes I just lie on the floor for a few minutes. There is something so nice about being completely horizontal. So if you feel like you need to just take a break for a minute and lie on the floor, there's nothing wrong with you. And if you are hearing this conversation and realizing that what you've been calling maybe mood swings might actually be a stress pattern, and you want some clarity around this and how your body's responding right now, the Hormone Clarity Quiz can give you that. So it walks you through a few simple questions and helps you see which pattern is most dominant for you: fatigue, stress, sleep, or metabolic signaling. And this isn't about labeling yourself, it's about understanding your physiology. And you can take that quiz via the link below. So if today helped you see your mood through a different lens, stay with me this month. Subscribe here on YouTube or follow the podcast on your favorite platforms so that we can keep building this understanding together. And if you're comfortable, tell me in the comments what situation tends to trigger you the fastest right now. Maybe it is your husband chewing. Not to judge it, but just to notice it. And as always, have faith and take action.